Have you ever just stopped and wondered, what's my purpose? What am I really here for? It's a question that has, well, echoed through all of human history. And for thousands of years, people have turned to ancient texts for answers. So today, we're going to dig into how that search involves both a promise of some really profound meaning and a surprisingly complex way of getting to it. Let's jump in.
It all starts with this, doesn't it? The big one. The source materials we're looking at today suggest that this is the foundational question that really drives our search for significance. And it's not just some philosophical thing to ponder. For a lot of people, it's a deep, personal hunger for meaning and direction.
And this quote right here, it just proves we're not alone in asking it. This isn't some modern problem we've just cooked up. It is a timeless, totally shared human experience. The sources really frame this as a fundamental part of what it means to be human.
All right, so let's first establish the core of this quest for meaning, at least as it's laid out in these texts.
So the first big idea that pops up is this. The search for meaning isn't about inventing a purpose out of thin air, but about discovering one that's already woven in to your identity. In this view, your purpose is tied directly to the idea of being created in the image of God.
Okay, so if the question is, why am I here? Where do these sources tell us to look for an answer? Well, they point straight to the Bible. And they present it not just as a book, but as an absolutely essential source for life and truth.
And wow, it's presented as offering quite a lot, isn't it? The texts claim it tackles those big questions we started with, that it nourishes your very soul and brings about salvation. But it doesn't stop there. It's also described as a source of truth, power, and ultimately peace and harmony. It's basically positioned as a complete toolkit for life.
This famous quote from Matthew really hammers the point home. The idea is that, just like our bodies need physical food to survive, our inner selves, our souls, need constant spiritual nourishment. And according to this, that nourishment is found in Scripture. It's framed as a total necessity, not just a nice to have.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Look at how the experience is framed here. It's not just about reading words on a page. It's about having a vertical conversation. That term suggests a direct, personal, two-way communication with God. It's about a relationship, not just an academic study.
But finding individual meaning isn't the whole story, not even close. The sources then zoom way out to show us a much bigger, almost cosmic framework for what purpose is all about. This is the grand narrative, the big picture. The Bible, as it's described here, tells one single sweeping story. It arcs from a perfect beginning all the way to an even more glorious end. So it's not just a random collection of tales, it's one overarching saga with a clear direction and a final destination.
And what's the ultimate goal of that story? Well, the divine purpose on this massive cosmic scale is described as a huge restoration project. The plan is to transform our current, fallen world into something brand new and perfect.
And here's where you come back into the picture. Believers are framed as being a part of this massive divine project, as God's workmanship. This connects your personal purpose directly to that grand cosmic plan. Your life, in this view, has meaning because you get to be part of a much larger, purposeful story.
Okay, so that all sounds pretty great, right? The texts lay out this incredible promise of profound meaning. But, and there's always a but, unlocking that meaning isn't as simple as just opening the book. There's a major challenge that stands in the way.
And this is the elephant in the room. We have these ancient texts filled with these incredible promises of meaning, but they were written in a world that is just fundamentally alien to our own. So how in the world do we bridge that gap?
And we're not talking about a small gap, it's immense. You've got massive differences in language, culture, history, even how they told stories. Everything. Simply reading the words on the page doesn't guarantee you'll understand. It's kind of like trying to get an inside joke from 3,000 years ago. Good luck.
So, how do you bridge a gap that immense? This is where a more academic, a more methodical approach comes into play. Theologians and scholars actually developed a whole discipline designed specifically to tackle this very problem.
And it has a fancy name, Biblical Hermeneutics. But don't let that term scare you. You can just think of it as the science and the art of interpretation. Its entire goal is to build a sturdy bridge across that historical and cultural divide, so we can understand what the text meant to its original audience and then what it might mean for us today.
And listen to how John MacArthur puts it, because this really gets to the heart of the matter. The whole point is to be objective. It's about letting the text speak for itself by understanding its original context,
rather than just imposing all of our own modern ideas and biases onto it.
You know, this whole challenge of interpretation, it isn't new. Not at all. As you can see from this timeline, the debate over how to interpret is basically as old as the texts themselves. Early on, you had biblical authors interpreting even earlier scriptures in their own writings. Later, you get these splits between schools of thought, like Alexandria, which loved allegorical readings, versus Antioch, which was all about the literal text. It kept evolving, and the Reformation shifted the focus again. The key takeaway here is that the how of reading has always been changing.
So how does this actually work? Well, it's a bit like being a detective. You have to look at all these different layers. Take semantics, for example. It's about what individual words meant back then. A word like world might mean the entire cosmos in one place, but in another, it could just mean the Roman Empire. Getting that wrong changes everything. The same goes for context. You have to understand what was going on historically when it was written. You combine all these clues, and you start to build a much clearer picture of the original meaning.
Which brings us to this really fascinating split. On one hand, you have the promise, this personal, divine conversation that offers peace and meaning. And on the other hand, you have the practice, a careful, almost scholarly effort to understand history and language and context. But the core insight from our sources is that these aren't opposing ideas. They're actually presented as two essential sides of the same coin. You need both in the search for real meaning.
And that leaves us with one last thought to chew on. It seems the journey to find meaning in these ancient texts really does involve both faith and careful study, both a personal quest and a historical investigation. So the question we have to ask ourselves is this: in that search for purpose, how much does the how we search affect the what we ultimately find?